Allison, thank you so much, and thank you everybody for having me. Those bios, when you write them, always seem too short, and then when you hear them read, they're like, "Oh, why did I write all that?" Nobody wanted that. I should have just focused on Dolly Parton. Um, anyway, I thank you for your time, and I thank you for your interest. The Stanford Parents Club has been a steady partner in my 7 years at Stanford, and elevating these conversations and thinking about new and different ways, and figuring out ways to really know what's going on with our students and ways that we can support them. And I'll highlight an early innovative collaboration we had early in my days at Stanford later in the presentation. So I thank you for your offer to direct my slides, but I'm just going to do it myself if that's okay. I'm going to share my screen here. And I think we'll have some folks who'll help moderate questions. I won't be monitoring the Q&A or the questions as we go, but I'll be happy to be interrupted at any time. So if you're moderating, please don't let me interrupt me. That's a picture of Vaden. If you haven't been to the Vaden Health Center, it's over on Campus Drive, back behind between the Frost residences and the graduate residences, just by Wilbur Field. So it's a beautiful state-of-the-art facility. So what I want to do today in our short time, in addition to holding some time for questions and answers, because parents always have questions, and we sometimes have answers about college student mental health, and I'll be glad to hold some time. But I want to give you a glimpse into the national landscape, what we're noticing across the country, some of the data, some of the trends that we're noticing. And then I want to switch it to what we're seeing at Stanford, very specifically, about how it correlates to those national trends and data, and also some of the specific things we're noticing with our students. And then what I was really invited to come here today was talk to you about what we're doing at Stanford to respond to the things we're noticing. So we're going to jump right in. I'll warn you that these first few slides are not happy slides. They are mirroring for us what we're seeing with our young people, our young adults, our college students. And so the first two slides are talking about the concerns and feelings that the college students tell us themselves. And these are from a wide consortium of universities and colleges across the country. No surprise to any of us who work in this field that anxiety and depression are the top two presenting concerns and issues, and even diagnoses among college university age people. And then we go down the list, and these all stay pretty consistent year over year. We don't see big jumps in any of these issues. We did see some things kind of spike and peak in ways we weren't quite anticipating over COVID, but those all seem to have normalized, and in some cases, as we'll get to in a few slides, have even gotten to a better place than they were before COVID. But you'll see the types of concerns and issues that students are articulating. And then we get into the feelings part. This survey from the Thriving College Students Index uses the term thriving. At Stanford, we use the term flourishing. And we'll talk more about that later in the half hour. But thriving and flourishing pretty much mean the same thing, and they mean what you think they mean. And so what this slide does for us is talk to us about kind of the differences in how students feel about different things, whether they're thriving or they're struggling or they're flourishing or they're languishing. So you'll see here, students are more apt to be thankful, grateful, be able to express some gratitude for everything in their lives if they're thriving. They're much less likely to be able to do that if they're struggling. Much more likely to be happy, much more likely to be stressed out if they're struggling. In addition, they're much more likely to be anxious or worried, and they're much more likely to be overwhelmed if they're struggling, if they don't have that positive mental health approach. So I give you this slide just to show you like how this manifests. It's one thing to talk about what we're feeling, but it's another thing to really dig in with students to talk about how is this manifesting in your life? How is this impacting the way that you show up every day in your personal life, your professional life, your academic life, and how is this making you feel about it? And then next, we talk a lot about how students are coping with the issues and the feelings and the concerns. Most of these not healthy. Procrastination, I think we probably all cope with certain things with procrastination. The trends towards poor sleep hygiene are accelerating at an alarming rate. I would dare guess that most of the 76% is actually not sleeping enough and not oversleeping. In case there are some cases where students do oversleep, and it's usually associated with severe depression. But most of our students have very poor sleep hygiene, and we're seeing that across the country, and a really alarming trend that people are just not getting enough sleep. Hobbies and activities can be a positive way to cope with stress and anxiety and depression if they're positive hobbies. Talking with family and friends, the same. Bad eating habits, we're noticing more. Doom scrolling, we're going to talk about social media in a little bit. Drinking alcohol, we know that more than 24% of our students at Stanford drink alcohol on a regular basis. We're somewhere around the 40% range on a regular basis, but this is suggesting that 24% of what we would guess would be 40% of our students are using alcohol as an unhealthy coping mechanism for the stress they're dealing with. Therapy, 21%. We see about 20% of our students in our counseling service. We'll talk about in a second. So we're pretty on brand there. And they're using academic support. All of our undergraduate students are required to meet with an academic advisor. Not many universities do that, so we're lucky that we do that. And we're seeing the trend that 14% of students are using drugs and other illicit substances as a way to cope with stress. I wanted to include this slide for you because I think as parents, you always hold concern, you always hold worry, and you always hold questions. And if you can't get your students to talk to you, you're not alone. But this is to help you understand what you think you detect, what you think they're telling you, what you think you can pick up on may not quite be at pace with what they're actually feeling. So students are actually almost double, or sometimes a little over double, in each of these situations, are experiencing depression at a much higher rate than parents are perceiving that their students are experiencing depression. Eating disorders, a little over double. Suicide ideation and intent, well over double, triple actually. And then substance abuse disorder, just a slightly higher. Students are experiencing that than parents are noticing. I tell you this not to make you feel bad about what you may not be picking up on or what your student may not be telling you. I tell you this because the more we know, the more we can actually design new ways to invigorate new conversations and new approaches to try to figure out what we can do to support our students. Now, okay, so that was a little bit of like not great news, but I'm going to talk to you about some trends that are happening. Over the last 3 years, we saw a very predictable, understandable, and commonly held decrease in our positive well-being, our flourishing over COVID. We know why. We know all the reasons, multifactored reasons, but that decline was steady and steep, and quite alarming. And since this, what we're now calling a post-COVID era, or living with COVID more helpfully with more understanding, we are seeing that trend back up. And in fact, the 24 data put us back up, well, not well above, but just above where we were just before COVID. We were seeing national trends somewhere around 37% of people, college students, having positive mental health just before COVID. That dipped down to about 28% at the peak of COVID, but we're back up to 38, and we're seeing those trends at Stanford as well. And we predict that when this year's data are received, we'll see an even higher increase. We may even get back up to 40%. Lots of conversations to be had there about why we think that is, and I'm happy to engage with that if you're interested. And just a little bit of text here to support those. We are seeing decreased symptoms of depression and anxiety amongst our students, and we're right on track with this at Stanford as well. We're seeing pretty significantly reduced suicidal ideation and suicide attempts. We are, however, and we're going to talk about this when we get to the section, seeing persistent challenges around social isolation and loneliness. Loneliness has become a national epidemic, and it's something that public health officials and university administrators and college counseling centers are talking about. It's something that's a bit of a phenomenon, and we're trying to figure it out. There's some inlays of social media and some things that are happening. We can talk about that, but we're noticing it at Stanford as well. And then, while sure we're all doing better than we were 5 years ago, or we thought that we would be, we're still collectively not holding a sense of positive well-being as much as we all would hope. And most of our students are rating their mental health as average. So let's talk about Stanford. Let's talk about what we're noticing here and how we might align with some of those trends, some of those data points, and some of those themes. Across all the diagnoses, anxiety, depression, other severe mental illnesses, we notice, and we have historically noticed, pretty similar trends. We don't skew too far off the national trends. We don't skew too far off the Ivy Plus cohort trends either. So we stay pretty in line. We do fall slightly below on the averages and the numbers on things such as severe depression or suicide ideation or suicide attempt. We do fall slightly below the national average. We fall below national averages on substance use. And we do fairly well compared to some of our cohorts and our peer institutions. But we don't fare so much better that we actually feel good about what's going on with our students. The top two, and these are kind of lumped together because there are a lot, each of these has a lot, but the top two things that we're noticing, in addition to everything that we've been noticing for the last couple of decades, But this sense of loneliness and isolation, um, our Surgeon General a few presidents ago, Vivek Murthy, listed loneliness as an epidemic, and we've been studying a lot in college mental health about what that means. Um, I can, with much data and much evidence, tie this back to social media. It took me a long time to come around to being able to say that the use of social media, particularly the adoption of social media and digital platforms at young ages and adolescence, was so harmful. And I finally got to the place where I realized that it truly is harmful. There's a book I'll recommend to you called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. If you haven't read it, if you haven't heard of it, pick it up. If you're concerned about what social media or digital platforms might be doing to our collective mental health as humans, but more particularly for adolescents and young adults. There's very, very, very damaging evidence and data that show that a play-based childhood, like all of us had, versus a phone-based childhood, does hopefully not irreversible, but seemingly irreversible um, change to the way that the human brain develops. And there's some of those changes to the human brain that are attributing to students' inability to form um, healthy friendships and relationships and escape that feeling of loneliness and social isolation. So we're doing some things at Stanford to try to like figure out how to get students out of their bubbles, how to help them, have those uncomfortable conversations with people they don't know, and maybe even ask that person out on a date. Scariest thing on the planet. How to do that. I did that all the time in college. I got rejected lots, but that formed my character and how I learned to move through the world. And the other thing is, this has always been an issue for Stanford students, not because they weren't prepared or ready for the workforce, but because they come to Stanford with such a ideation about perfectionism and getting that perfect job and starting their startup and becoming a billionaire. I think Stanford students have always held a collective uncertainty that was usually rewarded with return on their investment and their time at Stanford. But because of all the global challenges, political challenges, and economic challenges that don't look to be going away, our students are entering their Stanford career now with a lot more uncertainty, anxiety related to internship placements, jobs during their studies, jobs after their studies, and what that means for their career and their lifelong earning capacity. It's coming up lots and lots and lots with students. In fact, we now have a very healthy relationship with career education where they are borrowing some of the principles that we use in our well-being coaching that we'll talk about in a second to infuse it into what they're doing at career education to make sure that students are taking care of their well-being and have a good sense about career well-being, what they want to do. And we've always had that relationship since well-being coaching has been on the scope for the last 6 years. We've had that relationship with academic advising because we know students come to Stanford for the academics, and we've been very fortunate to have those relationships with academic centers. So I want to get into a little bit now about the resources we have available at Stanford. There is a QR code. You'll get this slide deck sent to you. I didn't put anything too privileged in here, so I could share it out. You'll get this. This is a QR code that will take you to a website. We about 5 years ago, just at the beginning of COVID, we took all of our websites and all of our resources related to student mental health and well-being at Stanford and put them into one place. And we organized them and categorized them in a way that hopefully was student friendly and helped them navigate that. Because one of the challenges of a place like Stanford is resource fatigue and resource navigation fatigue. We have a lot available here. As my bio said, I've worked at 7 institutions, 7 educational institutions, and this is by far the most plentiful one in the ways that we respond to student needs and concerns related to well-being. And it's overwhelming. I know I've been here at Stanford for 7 years. I still sometimes get a little confused. I'm pretty okay now. But my first few years here, I got very confused about the acronyms. We love an acronym at Stanford. I still get confused about those. Um, but I was getting confused about the acronyms. I was getting confused about what resource did what, who was who, and how we get students to the different resources. And we've done a lot of work to streamline that for students to be able to consume that in a more healthy way. And I think even more importantly, we've done a lot of work to make sure that our campus partners and our off-campus partners, like parents and families, are aware of those resources as well, so they can better help guide and refer their students to those resources. So check that website out. It's on a pretty constant change schedule. We're keeping it updated, but check that out. Now I want to talk to you about a few specific resources we have at Vaden Health Services. We have a clinical side of the house and then a non-clinical side of the house. And first, I want to talk about the clinical services. We have our Wyland Health Initiative, which is a baby counseling unit. There's a 1.5 FTE of counselors in that unit, and they are solely dedicated to and experts in supporting students along the gender and sexual identity spectrums. They work with all students, of course, and they provide assistance and resources and outreach for all students. And they're specifically um, um, aimed to work with that student population. Then on the other side over here, the confidential support team, CST, another small, not quite baby, but smaller counseling unit. These are our folks who are trained specifically in trauma-informed care. And even more specifically, they work with our students who have been impacted with or by sexual-based, gender-based, or relationship-based violence. So they do very deep, intense work with students, and they do a lot of work with their students that's art-based, that's very somatic, because that seems to be something that works really well with trauma-informed care. And then the mothership at the top there, we have our counseling and psychological services. That's our counseling center. We have about somewhere between 30 and 35 FTE. It depends on the year, depends on the day of the week sometimes. But we have a very robust counseling center with counselors who come with a full array of backgrounds of trainings and expertise and interest, clinical interest. And they range from social workers to LMFTs to psychologists to psychiatrists. So we have specialists who can help students with most issues. We don't currently offer long-term therapy solutions. College campus counseling centers just aren't programmed to set up to be that. We will hold students as long as we can hold them or as long as it's healthy. And we also have a very active referral process that gets students referred into one of the Stanford clinics or into another community clinic somewhere in the Palo Alto community. And we have a full-time referral coordinator who is a social worker who works with students as they're ready to transition out of CAPS care to be taken to another resource. When I got to Stanford about 7 years ago, CAPS was going through a good time, a disaster, but a not good time. And so we've been on improving the CAPS reputation tour for about 7 years now. I am very happy to report for the last couple of years, we don't show up in the Stanford Daily almost at all, which when you're in my field, when you're not showing up in the student newspaper, it means you're not doing something wrong. You're not doing something wrong. You may not be doing it right, but you're not doing something wrong. And so we do this survey of CAPS users every year, and you'll see that our most recent iteration of that survey, 90% of users said that they could schedule the CAPS appointment with ease. 96% of users said that their CAPS provider was respectful and considerate. 90% said that they felt their provider was helpful in addressing concerns. And 94% college students don't, 94% of college students don't recommend anything to their friends. But 94% of our users said they would recommend CAPS to a friend with mental health concerns. And the biggest news, and I'm still very happy to be able to say this, is that for the past several years, we've had a zero wait time for CAPS. One of the things that was attributed to the poor reputation that CAPS held was the long wait times to get in. And we've done a little bit of a service delivery model flip. And now we're able to hold that we can get students in almost always same day. And when it's not same day, it's very typically because of a student's availability, but we don't have any students who wait more than 2 days to get in to see a counselor. And we have on-call, day call counselors available every day, all day, Monday through Friday. So that's a resource available to them. And as I said, when I started, that wait was 11 to 12 days. And at CAPS, we see about 20% of the total student population. Another thing that we've introduced to support this is that we now have timely care. I didn't put the slide in here about that. I should have. I'll send that out. I'll add the timely care to the slide deck before I send it out. Timely care is a new 24/7, completely free to students. It's paid for by Stanford. Telehealth, there's both mental health and physical health. It gets a lot more traffic with mental health. Trained clinicians in a number of different languages, and it's available to students whether they're at Stanford or not, because we have clinicians through Timely Care located all around the world, in all 50 states and in a lot of countries, who speak different languages, have different cultural capacities, and there's no session limit to students, so they can use Timely Care whenever they would like. It's not instead of CAPS. It's very much a companion piece, and sometimes students much prefer a digital therapy solution than they do in-person CAPS. On the other side of the house, to marry with the clinical services, we have our non-clinical services, our upstream preventative work. Super is our alcohol and education office, And then all of our other clinical office services do outreach. They do the educational outreach deep into the community. So we have a pretty robust, we offer about 400 events a year from all of our different Vaden units out in the community, educating, engaging, teaching, holding conversations, talking about well-being and all the different ways that we do. And then what I really want to do is focus on what we're calling the mothership of our non-clinical services is well-being coaching. Well-being coaching started 6 years ago. Next month will be 6 years. It's hard to believe it's been that long. But it was made possible by a very generous founding gift by some Stanford parents, and some other Stanford donors have joined in. We now have 7 coaches who are offering one-on-one. It's not clinical, so it's not counseling, it's not therapy. It's like what we know, what we hold as kind of life coaching, with a very strong bent towards wellness and well-being, and coaching students to practice new habits or learn to practice new habits that will support their well-being goals and their success. They do that one-on-one coaching. Some of the themes we ask students when they come in what they want to see it's about, and these are all, there's lots of things that present, but these we've tried to group them here as best we can. But these are the general themes and the occurrences in which we see students. So growth, identity, career, purpose, values, all the way down to food and sleep. Sleep is becoming more and more an issue, as is food, and we're seeing more and more cases of disordered eating, and we're learning how to better respond to students who are maybe for the first time ever eating away from home, and learning to eat in community spaces and learning to eat in front of people they don't know, which can be really challenging. And we're also having better conversations, and our great partner here is the Office of Spiritual and Religious Life, about grief. Um, lots of loss happens when you're 18 to 25, and our students sometimes get to university, and for the very first time in their life they experience a loss, whether it's a pet or a friendship or a grandparent or another family member or a close friend. And so we're trying to step up our game to better respond to students, to help them understand what grief is and how they can coexist with it and be healthier with it. So I talked earlier about how we don't use thriving, we use flourishing. The opposite of flourishing here is presence. In coaching, we talk about feeling well, functioning well, being well, and we push students towards flourishing behavior, and that's just the presence of positive elements of mental health, whereas languishing is the absence of them. I tell you those two terms because I want to share this somewhat confusing data slide with you. I'll direct your attention to the different colors. So if you look at the red and the green first, the top one and the bottom one, these are the rates. The green is the rates of flourishing over the last 10 or so years of Stanford students. And then the red is the rates of languishing, the opposite of flourishing over the last 10 years. The 2014-15 school year, we're about even. We had slightly more students flourishing than we had languishing. And this is all on trend with national averages. Nothing here is damaging to us as a single institution because we're pretty much on trend. But you'll see that over time, there was a pretty steep decline, and then we slowly started to make that rise back up post-COVID, and we're closing that gap a little bit, but not as quickly as we'd like. Then, if you turn your attention to the blue and the purple lines, these are when students come into coaching services, we do a pre and a post. So as they're coming in, and then as they're leaving the coaching service, and they see us as long as they want to see us, but we'll conduct the same survey with them to do a check on their flourishing scores. And what we're noticing is astonishing returns on that investment in our coaching service. Students, when they come to us for coaching, they are languishing a little less. They're flourishing a little bit better than general population, which we see that as a positive thing. But by the time they leave our coaching service, they are languishing much less, and their flourishing scores have gone up significantly. So we're very proud of those numbers, and we're very proud to continue to grow the service. As I said, we have 7 coaches. I have a plan. The immediate plan is to grow that coaching team to 9, and then I have an even grander plan that'll help us grow it to about 25 or 26. But I just need a few folks with some money to show up and help us come up with that solution. We do group and team coaching, which is our trainings, our workshops. Any student organization, any faculty group, any staff organization on campus can request a training. We will build a training based on the needs of the group. We'll go in and do a consultation, figure out what is they need. We have most things ready to go in our catalog of trainings available, but we'll design something specifically that responds to the needs of who's requesting. And our hallmark program is WARM. I did a WARM training for the Parents Club 2021, maybe it was fall of 20, winter of 20. Many of you were stuck at home with your kids who were supposed to be here, and they were not happy, and you weren't happy, and everybody was just kind of despondent about what's going on. So we did a warm training specifically designed for parents and families, and it was really well received. I'm happy to come back and do that again. Then our last is community coaching. It's everything else that we do in well-being coaching. One of our resources, a new resource that you can scan. It's a it's sent out to all of our subscribers, the thousands of subscribers, and it's ongoing, a reminder of the services available to students. And there's really great topical articles written by others that help students understand from a student perspective what's going on right now. It's all very seasonal, all very current. It's on trend, on theme, and it talks about what's going on in student life in that moment, and then it helps them connect whatever it is they might be living with, struggling with, helps them connect to the most appropriate resource. And then we have our Stanford Red Folder. And while here, many colleges folder, and it's usually just a list of all the resources available and how you make a referral to that resource if you have a student who is in need or in crisis or approaching crisis. Our red folder is a bit more than that. It provides, helpful phrases that can be said, whether you're a parent or you're a faculty member or you're an RA, things you can say to somebody who you think might be in crisis or experiencing some critical emotions. So to help you with a higher level of comfort and confidence as you have those conversations, and then how to make a more successful referral to the resources. You can check it out. There's a website for that. But what I want to mention here is that when I got to Stanford and we came up with the idea of the red folder in 2019, we worked all summer on developing that resource, and it was really great. And I had no money. And so about that time, somebody from the Parents Club came into my orbit, and the Parents Club was the very first sponsor of our red folder, which has become, I don't know how it's become this popular, but it's become our most popular resource. We get requests almost daily from campus partners and even other campuses, other schools asking for copies of the red folder. So thank you for being a founding visionary on this resource that now Stanford has fully embraced the cost of, and we make this folder available. It's available online. We also have physical copies, and faculty members like to pin it to their bulletin boards in their offices because I think it gives them a little bit of comfort. And I love that we've been able to introduce that resource, and I love that it's so readily welcomed by our community. And that is it for me. I talked too much, but I can stay
Um,
longer.
Thank you so much, John. If it's okay, do you have a couple minutes to answer
Sure,
some questions?
absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. So somebody asked about procrastination early in your talk, said she was surprised by that being the number one coping mechanism. She said, I usually think of it as a result or symptom of mental health issues. So that was interesting. And should that change a parent's approach to dealing with a procrastinating child?
Yeah, I get your surprise because it is very often a co-presenting issue with a diagnosis or a mental health illness or a concern, and it's also, even if it is co-presenting as an issue, it's still a coping mechanism. I use it. I use it. I'm high functioning, late career, and I still procrastinate. I should have had this slide deck over to the Parents Club folks yesterday, and instead I was up late last night building it. So I think as humans, we use procrastination. And, students are often away from home for the first time and they're on their own devices. And procrastination is an easy default, especially when they see that everybody else around them is doing it. And the ways that it is kind of like glamorized in college student populations, like, oh, I have 57 things to do tonight and we're going to get them all done. And they do. Because our students are high performing, high functioning, and they get them done. And it's a little celebrated, and we're trying to break down the celebration of those types of behaviors because they're celebrating the fact that they can do it and they do it well, and we're trying to help them understand that they're taking dents in their mental well-being by by exercising those behaviors. What can you do as parents? You know your kid better than I do, and everyone's going to be different. And some kids will respond well to pestering, some won't. If my mom would have pestered me, I would not have responded well. So just like know that that's the number one thing, and then find your ways to talk to your student about whether they're staying on time, taking care of themselves, and getting their sleep. All those things are comorbid. And if they're not sleeping enough, they're probably procrastinating, or they're probably using substance, or they're probably trying to figure out how not to be lonely.
So kind of on that note, another question came in about sleep hygiene, and somebody said that their student was having trouble sleeping when it was so hot and there's no air conditioning. And while I don't expect that you're going to address the lack of air conditioning and how that might be remedied at Stanford, it does kind of raise the overall issue of things like not being able to control your environment, roommates who might have a different sleep schedule from you, the noise, the ambient noise in a dorm. So, how do you deal with helping students navigate those issues when they have less control over their sleep environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, uh, my immediate answer to most of your questions you're going to ask here is send them to coaching, because this is what coaches do.
Mhm.
Coaches will help identify what is the thing that you feel like is out of your control. What do you wish you had control over? What will you never have control over? And how can we help you to find ways and behavior patterns and pathways to get to the thing you want to get done? And so it's just real personal based. And so coaching is different from counseling in that we don't diagnose in coaching. We have conversations with students to help them identify what is it that's getting in your way. Are those things you have control over, you can change? Are they not? What can you change if you can't change the thing that you perceive is getting in your way? So it's a little bit of CBT, although we don't do CBT because we're not clinicians, but it's about how do you have a different relationship with the thing that you can't control. And the coaches are all really well skilled in doing that. And we, like I said, we're seeing an uptick in the number of students coming to us with sleep challenges, and we're having very healthy conversations. And we're starting to get such a preponderance of those issues, new ways to educate about sleep hygiene and having different. And in fact, winter quarter, next winter, week 3, I think we're going to do it. We're going to have the first ever sleep week where we have a different event every day. Some will be big celebrated high profile events. Some will be smaller. Some will be house based for the undergraduates in the houses they live in. But we're going to start making a tradition of, okay, you did fall quarter, you got through it, and now it's dark at 3 o'clock, and we gotta talk about sleep. We gotta talk about this is the season for your body to kind of like turn inward and nurture itself and regrow during the winter months. And we're gonna take some of the learnings we've had from these individual sessions and start to do some of that work with students.
Thank you. Another question had to do with the training. Who's sort of on the front lines, recognizing if somebody's in distress, but they're not bringing themselves to get support or help. So somebody asked about RAs, and I responded with yes, RAs and resident faculty or fellows, and there's the bridge counseling. But can you maybe address the fears about how do you all find the students who are suffering in silence, basically?
Great question. One of the many things I love about Stanford is that for undergraduates, I'm not going to talk about the graduate student experience here because it's very different. But for undergraduates, it's almost impossible for an undergraduate to go unseen for a full day. There's lots of sets of eyes on undergraduates every day. So when I got here and I recognized that as a resource, I recognized that was a resource that needed to be sophisticated and refined. So we put a lot of things in place to help those eyes on those students be better responders when they're noticing things, to be able to more successfully notice the thing and then respond to it more successfully and get them an assistance. So these warm trainings, there's a whole module in the warm training about how do you recognize when a student's in distress? How do you respond to it? How do you do that with comfort and confidence? And how do you do it in a way that makes the student feel safe? How do you make the referral? We now have a great partnership with the Dean of Students Office where we have, it can be anonymous. We hope that it's not, but a student of concern form. It's a QR code. There's a website, and they get lots of those concerns registered from faculty, from even family, parents and family saying, I just talked to my son and he's not doing well. Can somebody check on him? And the beauty of our undergraduate resident system at Stanford is that we have RDs living on campus and they will go check on it. And they'll do it in a way that they're specifically trained to do it in a way that is non-threatening, non-intrusive. And because we hope they already have a relationship with somebody in some authoritative position, they can do it in a way that's not surprising to the student if somebody shows up in their space. We also, something we started doing during COVID, it was our first warm training we did remotely during COVID. All of our warm trainings were in person, and I loved them because we were able to hold the attention of the room, whether it was 12 people or 400. But our very first warm training during COVID was with TAs. It was a disaster because I didn't know how to use Zoom and the TAs didn't want to be there and the world was on fire. It was a disaster. And now we do it every quarter where we train 300 to 400 TAs every quarter on how to recognize signs of distress in your undergraduate students and what to do about it. And we're getting more and more referrals to the coaching service and to CAPS from TAs who now have been trained. I'll tell you a little anecdote. The TAs were not buying this. Part of the reason that first one was a disaster, all the things I just mentioned, but the TAs just didn't see. They didn't see why they needed to know this until about the third time that we did it. So probably the winter of 21, I opened it, and my preamble to that warm training we did with TAs, all still virtual, was one of these days, if your career goes the way that right now you think you want it to, you're going to be on the wanting to be hired side of a tenure track faculty job interview. And I promise you that if you go in with a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of vernacular, a little bit of understanding of college mental health and what your opportunities are as a faculty member to do that, you're going to show up in ways other people won't be able to. And that clicked them, that now they're in, that they bought it. And what I love about that is using this public health approach is that not only are we changing the ways that these 400 TAs are helping our undergraduates right now at Stanford, not all of those TAs are going to get teaching jobs at Stanford. They're going to go out and teach at other colleges and other universities. So we're sending them out into the world with this skill set, and we hope that it starts to have a more of a global impact.
Yeah.
So we've equipped a lot of people on the front line with skills about how to do that, and I'm very pleased we've been able to do that.
I have a question from one of the slides about the flourishing versus languishing slide, that the precipitous decline in flourishing seemed to actually predate COVID. And I was curious if something happened that I'm not remembering that caused that for a few years.
Politics,
Mm, okay, makes sense.
2016 on. There was I don't want to get political here, but there was a new discourse in
Mhm.
politics that impacted the way all of us live.
I see.
And social media. Social
Hmm.
media took off. And one of the reasons, like, COVID was in no way good for us, in no way. And so why did our decline and start to taper off a little bit during COVID? And it's because students were able to go back into this like safe bubble where they didn't have to go out. They didn't have to like worry about not having social connections because none of us had social connections. They were able to go back. So there's lots. I promise you, I could talk for hours
Right.
about social media, and now I'm the firm believer. But I think that 4 years was the confluence of finally getting to the point where social media was this undeniable impact,
Mhm.
2015, 2016. Because the author of the book that I mentioned says the 2010 was the start of it. Anybody born after 1995 is, to use his, I'm not such a doomsdayist, but to use his words, it's irreversible because their brain is already hardwired. So by 2015, those folks were 20 years old. And we got into that place where it was just irreversible. So that and politics, and I think with the political discourse souring, lots of worries about the job market, economic prosperity started to really come into students' minds.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything going on from your area at Stanford in specifically educating students about social media? Because I think sometimes they feel in college that they're sort of beyond, being affected the way that high schoolers and middle schoolers are. Is that an effort that you're making or not so much?
Um, Not so much. It's something we've been talking about, and we just don't know how to do it. And part of the reason is we just had an hour in service last week with the well-being coaching team that I led because I read this book and I was given them the presentation of the data. And part of our challenge with it is that as a society and us as the adults in the room, we don't even know how to disentangle ourselves from
Right.
it. Like I didn't disbelieve the things that I believed about social media until I read that book. I was still able to hold on to the goodness of it, finding community. And for those folks who don't know how to find community, they find friends. And it wasn't until I was presented with all those data.
Yeah.
So no, we're not doing enough, and we have to. We have to figure that out. So this was our first step as a well-being coaching team to try to figure out how we can disentangle ourselves first, and then how we start to do some work with students. There is one CAPS clinician, Tom Ellis. He works over in the GSB, specifically in the Graduate School of Business, and he's a bit of an expert on it. And he's doing some really great work with the GSB students.
Hmm.
So we're going to partner with him and see if there's some things we can do. And there's a few coalitions popping up around the country. There's one out of Virginia Tech right now. We're going to see if we can do some work with them. And there's a few things happening in some of the labs at Stanford around it. And Anna Lemke, who runs the dual diagnostics clinic, who wrote Dopamine Nation, like she's our steady partner on all forms of addictions. So we're going to get there, but we just haven't quite figured out how to do it yet.
Yeah. Somebody posted in the chat from Parents Club a student-led effort to disconnect from social media. So maybe there are some that could help if it comes from students as well.
Yeah.
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 Yeah.